Over 100 years ago, S. Ansky, the secular Yiddish playwright most famously known for writing the Dybbuk, said, "There is no other people like the Jewish people that talks about itself so much but knows itself so little." Over 100 years later, we're still talking about ourselves a lot, and we still don't know ourselves very well. I'm not sure if that's comforting or depressing. I'll leave that up to you. But lately, I've come to suspect that these two things might actually be connected. That the reason we don't know ourselves very well might be related to the ways that we talk about ourselves. Imagine for a moment a world in which the first question that you get asked when meeting someone new is, "What do you do for work?" I know you have to stretch your imagination for this one, but just imagine it. Now imagine how constantly talking about what you do professionally might affect your sense of self. You might start to think that your worth is entirely defined by your work. You might start to think that your professional achievements are the only achievements that matter. You might even start to cultivate certain traits or beliefs within yourself to enhance this professional version of yourself. The way that we talk about ourselves matters. It affects not just how others perceive us, but how we perceive ourselves. It's how we show up in the world. And I believe that we Jews need to find different and better ways to talk about ourselves. Just as someone who constantly focuses on their work identity might have an underdeveloped sense of who they are outside of work, I think our Jewish identities have been underdeveloped by the limited and confusing ways that we talk about being Jewish. The vast majority of American Jews today talk about their Jewish identity as either a religion or some combination of race, ethnicity, peoplehood, or both. This framing even showed up in this season of The Studio, which recently won an Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series. In it, the main character, Matt, yells out at one point, "Jews are a race. It's not my fault that Jews are a race. I mean, we're a race of people and a religion. It's complicated." It is complicated. I'll throw into the mix, in addition to religion and race, I think lately we've also been self-identifying Jewishly in a third way, which is in our relationship to Israel. Now, there is, of course, a reason that Jews are self-identifying in these three ways. Judaism is a religion, we are a people, and Israel, being the only Jewish state and the place with the highest concentration of Jews in the world, is very much tied to our Jewish identity, whether we like it or not. But I think these three frameworks add more confusion than clarity. Let's start with Judaism as a religion. In our Christianity-dominated country, the word religion carries with it a lot of associations that don't resonate with Judaism's understanding of religion. Those associations include religion as something that is centered in a house of worship, something that's dogmatic, that's more politically conservative, that stands for singular and ultimate truth, that demands faith without doubt or questioning or skepticism, that's primarily expressed through praying to and believing in God, that's focused on the afterlife, whether heaven or hell, etc. Thinking about ourselves as a religion in this context perpetuates misconceptions about Judaism, both for others but also within ourselves. Now, when it comes to Judaism as a race, ethnicity, peoplehood, to put it bluntly, we're not a race or an ethnicity. Calling us a race or an ethnicity obscures the fact that we come in all races and ethnicities. And while it is true that there is a peoplehood component to Judaism, in that Judaism can be something that you are born into, this concept can also be misleading. Tribal affiliation was never meant to be the totality of Jewish identity. Reducing Judaism just to an inherited trait renders it empty and meaningless. Finally, let's turn to an Israel-based Jewish identity. Discussing our relationship to Israel and our perspectives on what's going on there currently is very important. But I'm not sure that these conversations are helping us understand our Judaism or our Jewish identity any better. In fact, I actually fear that the Israel conversation has overshadowed any and all other aspects of our Jewish identity. Even worse, I think it's causing us to conflate our Jewish identity with a political opinion about a modern-day nation-state. Surely Judaism is more than that. I found that these three ways of self-identifying Jewishly don't just cause greater confusion among ourselves, they also cause greater division between us. Identifying with the religious aspect of Judaism inevitably leads us to dividing ourselves up into denominations, even though, I hate to say it, most Jews can't tell you what each denomination means, and even though most Jews don't fit neatly into any denominational box. Identifying as a people also divides us, leading us to ask, who is a Jew? Since an identity entirely defined by who's in and who's out typically ends up excluding any perceived threat to the imagined unity of that group. In an Israel-based Jewish identity, I'm going to trust that I don't have to explain how that one divides us. These three ways of identifying Jewishly reinforce divisions between us, and they focus our attention on aspects of Judaism that are both confusing and not representative of the essence of Judaism. Which is why this morning, I'd like to suggest that we change the conversation about Jewish identity by shifting towards 5 core aspects of Judaism, which are each simple and accessible to everyone, whether you're born Jewish or not. Each one stands on its own and can lead to a full and rich Jewish identity, but each one also intersects and can be combined with one another. By shifting our conversational focus to these 5 aspects of Judaism, I believe that we will be able to better understand and deepen our connection to our Jewish identity and to one another. So without further ado, those 5 core aspects are culture, community, spirituality, ethics, and wisdom. Don't worry, I'm going to go through each one. Let's start with Jewish culture. I'm aware that the cultural Jew is a familiar trope and a common way that Jews identify today. But unfortunately for Jewish culture, many who identify as cultural Jews don't actually engage with Jewish culture at all. A Pew study conducted of American Jews in 2020 found that, and I'm quoting here, those who are low on the scale of traditional religious observance tend to be much less active in the vibrant array of cultural activities available to U.S. Jews in the 21st century. In fact, no more than about 1 in 10 low observance Jews say they often do any of the dozen things mentioned in the survey, including reading Jewish publications, listening to Jewish music, and going to Jewish film festivals. Identifying as a cultural Jew, I think, has just come to mean that one is not religious. But it can mean much more than that. Jews have been around for a very long time, and we are such a diverse and prolific people. There is so much to work with and to draw from when it comes to cultivating a rich cultural Jewish identity. Are you a language person? Study Hebrew or Yiddish or Ladino or one of the many other Jewish language from our long history. Are you a foodie? We have more than bagels and lox, I hate to say it. Music, more than klezmer. Art, more than Marc Chagall. Do you like reading? Books of American Jewish literature from the last 100 years alone could fill a room. Into TV and movies? There's more than Seinfeld and Fiddler on the Roof, although a great place to start. My point is, I don't care what type of culture you want to engage with, but if you want to claim that cultural Jewish identity, you're going to need to develop a cultural literacy. That is, you'll need to actually engage with our culture. So if this aspect of Jewish identity resonates with you, I invite you to start to change the Jewish conversation by asking one another questions like, what Jewish cultural content are you currently consuming? What should be in the Jewish cultural canon? What makes a piece of culture Jewish? Let's move on to the second way of identifying Jewish, the community. The idea of Jewish peoplehood, I found, can sometimes feel too abstract and too broad to actually put into practice. This idea of Jews as a global family, I'm supposed to care about Jews who I've never met all across the world. But whereas peoplehood maybe doesn't work on a macro scale, it does work, or at least it can work, on a micro scale. And by that I mean within a local community. The problem for many of us American Jews living in hyper-individualistic America is that we don't actually know what community looks and feels like. Community, I hate to break it to us, requires some level of compromise of our individualism, of our autonomy, of our freedom. And I'm not sure how many people who claim to want community are ready to make the sacrifices necessary to achieve it. But community is the heart of Judaism, so much so that it can be a full and fulfilling Jewish identity all on its own. Community-based Jews are less focused on who is a Jew and who is allowed in, and are more focused on how we treat the people who do show up. Judaism invites us to care for one another, to be there for each other during the good times and the bad. It also pushes us to talk to people who are different than us, to really understand where they're coming from and what's going on in their lives. And most profoundly, it forces us to be with people who are just different than we are. I believe it's an antidote to the polarization and isolation that's causing so much harm in this country today. To be clear, a Jewish community does not need to be a religious one. What makes a community Jewish isn't the community rituals or the beliefs of its members. A Jewish community is simply a group of people committed to gathering in a Jewish context. What makes that community Jewish is up to each community. So the second set of questions that I'd invite us to ask one another: what Jewish community or communities are you a part of, or do you want to be a part of? What obligations and commitments have you made, or are you willing to make, to be a part of that community? And how does or how might being a part of a Jewish community enhance your life? The third aspect of Judaism I'd like to bring to our attention back to is spirituality. If the recent explosion of interest in things like astrology and crystals is any indication, I think many Americans are spiritually seeking. Did you know that we Jews have been using Jewish tools and practices to seek out the divine for over 3,000 years? Judaism can help you cultivate your spiritual self. People are always shocked to learn that there are many ways of understanding and relating to God in our tradition, even according to very traditional sources. Don't like thinking about God as a bearded man in the sky? Me neither. Judaism uses countless metaphors for God, even in our high holiday liturgy in prayers such as Ki Anu Amecha. Turned off by God language altogether, you can explore holiness or sacredness or transcendence instead. Or you can act in ways that are godly, which is how the Talmud says we're meant to connect to God anyway. Or maybe your spirituality is more inward focused. As I said earlier, the Jewish word for soul is neshama, which is the same as breath. Your breath is a spiritual tool. So is music. You don't even need to know Hebrew words. Our tradition has so many nigunim, which means wordless melodies, that are accessible to anyone willing to hum lai 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 or nai nai nai. Is your spirituality maybe rooted in mindfulness? Judaism has blessings for literally everything, including seeing a beautiful person or going to the bathroom. Maybe you're more into meditation. We have all kinds of spiritual meditation practices, including something called hitbodedut, where Hasidic Jews a couple hundred years ago would wander through the forest and talk out loud. In fact, the Hebrew word for prayer, lehitpalel, literally means to judge oneself, which highlights the inward-facing nature of prayer. There are many, many spiritual paths in Judaism, and like any spiritual identity, It will take time and work to cultivate, but if you want it, Judaism can lead to the divine, to the holy, to the soulful. So the third question that I'd like us to ask each other in this upcoming year, what's your relationship to spirituality? When have you felt connected to God or to your soul? What spiritual practices do you have, or might you be open to trying? A fourth essential aspect of Judaism is ethics. Judaism calls on each of us to do our part in making the world a better place. Those who feel moved by this aspect of Judaism will let their Judaism guide them not in the pursuit of the divine, but in their pursuit of the just. Justice, justice you shall pursue is a call that might feel familiar to many of us who grew up in more liberal, progressive Jewish traditions. I know that we are living through what feels like an unjust and maybe even regressive time. So for those who might be feeling less ethically inspired these days, I'll just say this. Judaism does not value justice because the world is fair. Judaism values justice because it should be fair. Now, what does fairness look like, and how should we get there? Those are critical conversations that we need to be having. Spoiler alert, there's going to be more than one vision for what a just future looks like, and there's going to be more than one option for how to get there. Judaism invites the conversation and welcomes the disagreement. For those cynics and skeptics who question whether this is real Judaism, this framework is probably not for you. But let me be very clear. This is a core and essential part of Judaism and always has been. 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Hillel summarized Judaism as follows: that which is hateful to you, do not do to others. I know that caring about the future of the world is not unique to Jews, and you don't have to be Jewish to care about the world. But just because it isn't particular to us does not mean that it's not essential. You don't need to believe in God. You don't need to be traditionally observant to be an ethics Jew. You just need to claim your heritage, one that looks out for those who are most marginalized and oppressed. So the fourth set of questions that I'd like us to ask ourselves is, how do you understand Judaism's vision for a just world? And what can and should we be doing to get there? Last but not least, there's the wisdom aspect of Judaism. This approach relates to Judaism as a way of life, helping us live more deeply and more fully. For 3,000 years, Jews have been attempting to answer big questions of truth, of meaning, of purpose. I think it's fair to assume that during those 3,000 years, we've probably collected a few nuggets of wisdom about what it means to be human. Now, it's easy to conflate the wisdom path with spirituality or ethics. Of course, there's a lot of spiritual wisdom that helps us understand our world better, and there's a lot of ethical wisdom that helps us show up for others, build a just society, act morally, and so on. But whereas the spiritual aspect is concerned with living a holy life, and whereas the ethics aspect is concerned with living a good or just life, the wisdom aspect is concerned with living a full life. This aspect of Judaism is grappling with the simplest yet deepest questions of human existence. How should we spend our time? How should we act in the world? What character traits should we work on? How should we grow? How do we see ourselves and each other more clearly? How can we cultivate more intimate friendships and relationships? The list goes on. Jewish wisdom, just like therapy, does not yield results on day one. You won't be able to open a book and immediately find all the answers. Jewish wisdom requires study and seeking and introspection. But if you commit to seeking out wisdom through a Jewish lens, you will find it. Keep digging, our rabbis say, because the Torah contains everything. So the final set of Jewish questions that I'd like to ask each of us to ask one another: what are you working on within yourself? How has Jewish wisdom enhanced your life? And what wisdom does our tradition have to offer us at this moment? Imagine if, instead of asking you about your job, the first question everyone asked you was, what do you care about? Imagine just how that simple shift in focus would have radical implications for how you show up in the world. Now continue your imagination. What if, when asked, what kind of Jew are you, we answered not along lines of religion or peoplehood or views on Israel, but with one of these 5 aspects of Jewish identity, or more. If we can shift the focus of our Jewish connections to this, imagine the implications for how we might understand our Jewish identity and how we might show up Jewishly in the world. I'm hoping that these 5 aspects of Judaism can help us better connect to each other as well, since they're not mutually exclusive and they're not defined in opposition to one another. You can be a spiritual and ethics Jew, and you can be a spiritual and cultural Jew. And while those two might not be able to bond about ethics or culture, they can bond on spirituality. All we need to do is find that one aspect that we share in common. And because these 5 aspects of Judaism are not mutually exclusive with one another, they allow, and you can check my math later, for 120 different combinations or flavors of Judaism. And each of those 5 aspects will look a little different depending on which other aspects they're paired with. Someone who is strictly a cultural Jew is going to relate differently to Jewish culture than someone who is both a cultural and spiritual Jew. This approach allows Jewish diversity to flourish while also giving us many avenues over which to connect Jewishly. So this Rosh Hashanah and in the year ahead, I invite each of you to reflect on and talk about your connection to these 5 aspects of Judaism: culture, community, spirituality, ethics, and wisdom. May we become a people that talks about itself so much and knows itself so well. Shana Tova, wishing you a Jewishly meaningful year ahead.